Sometimes the place you think will save you becomes something else entirely. Delah Crow spent 30 years on the road before she finally bought that old homestead in the Bitterroot Mountains. She wanted peace. She wanted to be alone. She drove to town for supplies and was gone 3 days. When she came back, there were 11 men living in her house, strangers, drifters with worn faces and heavy pasts. They had made themselves at home. They were not planning to leave. Winter was coming fast, and Delah had to decide what to do. But these men were not just passing through. They carried secrets that reached back further than anyone knew. What happened next would change all of them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The road to the homestead was 14 miles of switchbacks and washboard ruts that could shake the fillings from your teeth if you took them too fast. Delah Crow had driven worse. She'd guided hunters through trails that weren't trails at all, just suggestions carved into mountainsides by animals that knew better than humans where to step. For 30 years, she'd lived out of a camper that smelled like gun oil and coffee, moving with the seasons, tracking elk migrations and wealthy clients who wanted to feel wild for a week before returning to their offices in Denver or Seattle. She was 58 years old. Her hands were scarred from gutting deer and mending fence wire. Her face had been weathered by sun and wind until it looked like the land itself, something that had always been there and would remain long after softer things had faded. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't own a dress. Her boots were resoled twice, and she intended to resole them again. The homestead had come to her attention through a lawyer's letter last spring. A distant cousin, so distant she'd never met him, had died without children, and the property had worked its way through family branches until it landed at her feet. The letter said the place was old, probably needed work, and sat on 40 acres of mountain land in the Bitterroots. It came with a deed that looked legitimate, and a black and white photograph of a log house with a stone chimney. Delah had driven up to see it in May, when the snowmelt was still running hard through the creeks. The house sat in a clearing surrounded by lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, with a view that stretched across 3 valleys. Behind it, the mountains rose like old men's shoulders, patient and unmoved by time. The roof sagged in places. The porch steps were rotted through, but the bones were good. Hand-hewn logs fitted tight, a foundation of river rock that had settled square. She'd walked through the empty rooms with her hands in her pockets, listening to the silence. It was the kind of silence that made city people nervous, the kind that had weight and presence. To Delah, it sounded like home, or what home might sound like if she'd ever had one. There was a main room with a river stone fireplace that climbed to the ceiling. A kitchen with an old cast-iron stove that would need new pipe. 2 small bedrooms and a loft space under the eaves. Out back, a barn that leaned like it was tired, and a root cellar dug into the hillside. She'd bought it for $18,000, paid in cash from an envelope she kept under the spare tire in her truck. The transaction took 3 weeks to process through the county office. She'd spent that time finishing out her last contract, a father-son hunt in the Bob Marshall wilderness, and thinking about what it meant to stop moving. By late August, she'd driven her camper up the mountain road for the last time. She parked it beside the barn and unloaded 30 years of accumulated life, a rifle collection worth more than most people's cars, boxes of books about animal behavior and weather patterns, a camp stove that had boiled water on 4 continents, and not much else. She traveled light. It was a point of pride, the first week she'd cleaned. Mice had made nests in the kitchen cabinets. Spiders had claimed the corners. The windows were so thick with grime that the light came through amber and soft. She swept and scrubbed and threw open every window to let the mountain air push through. At night, she slept on a camping pad in the main room and listened to the house settle around her. The creak of logs contracting in the cool air, the scratch of branches against the roof, the distant sound of an owl asking its question over and over. The second week, she'd started repairs. She replaced the porch steps with fresh-cut pine. She patched the roof where shingles had blown away. She cleaned the chimney and burned her first fire, watching the smoke rise straight and true. The work felt good. Her body knew how to do these things. How to measure twice and cut once, how to read wood grain, how to make something solid from materials that wanted to fall apart. By the third week, she'd begun to feel the first stirrings of something unfamiliar. Contentment. She woke with the sun and worked until the light failed. She ate simple meals standing at the kitchen counter. She walked the property boundaries, learning the land the way she'd once learned the territories of the animals she tracked. There was a spring-fed creek on the western edge, a stand of aspen that would turn gold in a few weeks. Rocky outcroppings where she could sit and see for miles. The town was called Pine Haven, though there weren't many pines and it wasn't particularly haven-like. It consisted of one main street with a post office, a grocery store, a hardware store, a bar, and a diner that closed at 6. The population sign said 412, but Delah suspected that number was optimistic. People here didn't talk much to strangers, which suited her fine. She went down once a week for supplies, paid cash, and left. The hardware store owner was a man named Gil Pemberton, maybe 70, with hands like gnarled wood and a tendency to squint at people as if measuring them for truth. The first time Delah came in looking for roofing nails, he'd watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You're the one bought the Crow place," he'd said. It wasn't a question. "That's right. That land's got a history. Most land does." He'd nodded slowly, then fetched her nails without further comment. But she'd noticed the look he gave her, part warning, part curiosity, all caution. She'd heard other whispers too, when people thought she wasn't listening. The woman at the grocery store checkout had mentioned something to the bag boy about that property and never did settle. Right, an old man at the post office had looked at her address on a package and shaken his head. But no one said anything directly, and Delah didn't ask. She figured if something needed knowing, she'd find out soon enough. By late September, she'd settled into a rhythm. Morning coffee on the porch, watching the sun burn the frost off the meadow grass. Work during the day, always something that needed fixing or building or clearing. Evenings by the fire with a book or just her thoughts. The solitude she'd been seeking for 3 decades wrapped around her like a blanket. She decided to make one last supply run before the weather turned. Winter came early at this elevation, and once the snow started, that road would be impassable for weeks at a time. She made a list: 50-pound bags of flour and rice, canned goods, kerosene for the lamps, extra ammunition, batteries, matches, salt, coffee, whiskey for medicinal purposes. Enough to last until spring if she needed it to. She loaded up the truck on a Tuesday morning, the air sharp enough to make her breath visible. The drive down took 2 hours. Careful and slow around the curves. In town, she worked methodically through her list. Gil Pemberton helped her load the heavy bags, and this time he spoke more freely. "You planning to winter up there alone?" "That's the idea. It's a hard winter on that mountain. Had folks get snowed in for 3 months straight. I've wintered in worse places." He'd studied her face, then nodded. "I expect you have." He paused, weight shifting from one foot to the other. "That old place, the Crow Homestead. Fellow who built it, Tobias Crow, he was your people." "Some kind of cousin. Never knew him. He was a strange one. Good man, mind you, but strange. Used to take in drifters. Fed 'em, let 'em stay. House was always full of men with nowhere else to go." Gil had looked away then, toward the mountains. Some folks said he was crazy. Others said he was a saint. Probably both were right. Delah had filed that information away without comment. Dead men's habits weren't her concern. She'd spent 2 nights in town at a motel that rented rooms by the week to ranch hands and truck drivers. She needed to wait for a parts order for the water pump, and it gave her time to eat meals she didn't have to cook and take a hot shower that lasted more than 5 minutes. On the second evening, she'd sat in the diner with a newspaper and a cup of coffee that had been on the burner too long. An old woman had stopped by her table, leaning heavy on a cane. "You're staying up at the Crow place?" "Yes, ma'am. You see anything unusual up there?" Delah had looked up from her paper. "Like what?" "Signs of people, campfires, things moved around?" "No, ma'am. Just me and the mice." The woman had stared at her for a long moment, lips pressed thin. "You be careful. That place has a way of attracting lost souls. Then she'd moved on, leaving Delah with more questions than answers. Thursday morning, she'd loaded the last of her supplies and headed back up the mountain. The truck labored on the steep grades, but it was a good truck, a 1987 Ford that had never quit on her. She'd owned it for 15 years, and she intended to drive it until the frame rusted through. The aspens had turned while she was gone. Gold leaves flickered in the breeze like coins catching light. The air smelled like pine sap and coming snow. She drove with the windows down despite the cold, breathing it in. This was why she'd bought the place. This moment, this feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. The road curved around a final bend, and the homestead came into view. Smoke was rising from her chimney. Delah's foot came off the gas. The truck coasted forward while her mind worked through possibilities. She'd banked the fire carefully before leaving. It couldn't still be burning 3 days later. Could someone have broken in? Was there a forest fire nearby, and she was seeing smoke from the wrong source? She pulled to a stop 50 yards from the house and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. She reached behind the seat for her rifle, a Winchester 30-06 that had been her father's, and checked that it was loaded. Then she stepped out of the truck, quiet and careful. Fresh tire tracks marked the dirt yard. Not just one vehicle, several. The barn door was open. She could see movement inside the house through the windows. Not one person, multiple figures. Delah moved forward with the rifle low but ready. Her heart was steady. Fear wasn't something she indulged often. She'd faced charging elk and cornered mountain lions with less anxiety than most people felt ordering coffee. But this was different. This was her home being violated. She climbed the porch. Steps, her new steps that she'd built herself, and pushed open the front door. The first thing she saw was the fire burning bright in her fireplace. The second thing was the men. They were everywhere, one asleep on her couch, two at her kitchen table playing cards, one stirring something on her stove. Others scattered through the space like they belonged there, 11 men. She counted them automatically, the way she'd count animals in a herd. They all turned to look at her. No one seemed particularly surprised or concerned about the woman with the rifle standing in the doorway. The silence stretched out for 3 heartbeats. Then, one of the men at the table, weathered face, silver beard, eyes that had seen things, spoke in a voice like gravel. "You must be Delah. We've been expecting you." Delah didn't lower the rifle. "Get out of my house." The bearded man set down his cards with deliberate care. "I'm afraid it's not quite that simple. Seems simple to me. This is my property. You're trespassing. You leave, or I call the sheriff." "There's no phone line up here," another man said from the couch. He was younger than the others, maybe 40, with haunted eyes and restless hands. "Hasn't been serviced to this place in 20 years. Then I drive down and bring him back myself. The bearded man stood slowly, hands visible and empty. "My name's Harlan Price. Before you go making that drive, maybe you should hear us out." "I don't need to hear anything. I need you gone. We have as much right to be here as you do." That stopped her. "Excuse me." Harlan gestured toward the fireplace. Delah's eyes followed the movement, and for the first time she noticed what hung above the mantel. A wooden cross, maybe 2 feet tall, hand-carved from what looked like pine. Names were etched into its surface, 11 names, each one carved with care. "Come look," Harlan said. Delah kept the rifle trained on the center of the room as she moved closer. The names were weathered but readable. Harlan Price, Lyle Patterson, Buck Ramsey, Vernon Moss, Silas Harding, Ray Coleman, and 5 others. Beside each name was a year. Some dated back to 1995, others were more recent. The newest was from 2019. "What is this?" "This is Sanctuary," Harlan said. "Has been for near 40 years. Tobias Crow started it. When he died, we kept it going. Tobias Crow was my cousin. He's been dead for 8 years. Whatever arrangement he had with you died with him. That's where you're wrong." Harlan moved to a shelf beside the fireplace and pulled down a folded piece of paper, yellow with age. He held it out to her. "This is his will. The real one, not whatever the county has on file." Delah snatched the paper one-handed, eyes never leaving the men. She unfolded it against the rifle stock and read, The handwriting was shaky but clear. To the men who find their way here, this place is yours as much as it is anyone's. Keep it open. Keep it safe. Let no man be turned away who comes in genuine need. It was dated 2016 and signed by Delah Crow. This isn't legal, Delah said. I have a deed filed with the county. So did Tobias. But this place has always been bigger than deeds and papers. Harlan's voice was patient, like he was explaining something to a child. It made Delah's jaw tighten. Every man here carved his name into that cross when he first came. It's a promise. We take care of this place. In return, it takes care of us. I paid $18,000 for this property. We're not trying to take anything from you, said the man who'd been stirring the pot on the stove. He was tall and thin, with scarred hands that moved constantly. We just need a place to be, especially with winter coming. Delah looked around the room more carefully now. The men were worn down in the way that came from hard living, clothes that had been mended multiple times, boots with holes, faces that carried years of weather and worry. But the house itself looked better than when she'd left it. The floor had been swept. The windows were clean. The woodpile by the fireplace was stacked neat and full. You've been maintaining this place, she said. Every year, Harlan confirmed. We come up in the fall, make sure everything's ready for winter, fix what needs fixing. Some of us stay through the cold months. Others move on when the road's clear. But we always come back. For 3 days I've been gone. You moved in the second I left. We saw your truck heading down the mountain. Figured it was time. The rifle was getting heavy. Delah's arms were strong, but holding a weapon at ready for this long made even seasoned muscles ache. She needed to make a decision. These men weren't acting aggressive. They weren't drunk or obviously dangerous, but they were in her house, uninvited, and showing no signs of leaving. I'm going to step outside, she said. You're going to stay in here. If anyone follows me, I'll shoot first and apologize later. Understand? Harlan nodded. Understood. Delah backed toward the door, rifle still raised. None of the men moved. She pushed through the door and down the porch steps, then circled around to her truck. The keys were still in the ignition. She could drive down the mountain right now, bring back the sheriff, and have these men removed by force. But something made her pause. She set the rifle in the truck bed and looked at the house. Really looked at it. The chimney repair she'd noticed before leaving, that was new work, and she hadn't done it. The barn door hung straight now when it had been crooked. Someone had cleared the drainage ditch on the north side of the property, something she'd been meaning to do but hadn't gotten around to yet. These men hadn't just occupied her home. They'd been taking care of it. She climbed into the truck bed and checked her supplies. Everything was there untouched. The water pump parts, the bags of flour and rice, the ammunition. If these men were thieves, they were the worst thieves she'd ever encountered. Delah sat on the tailgate and watched the sun drop behind the mountains. The temperature fell with it, sharp and sudden the way it did at elevation. Her breath formed clouds. Inside the house, she could see lamplight, her lamps, her kerosene, and shadows moving behind the windows. Her whole life, she'd been alone by choice. She'd watched other guides build families, settle into towns, take jobs that kept them in one place. She'd always chosen different. The road, the wild places, the next mountain. She'd told herself it was freedom. Maybe it was just fear dressed up in practical clothing. She'd bought this homestead thinking she'd found the answer, a place remote enough that solitude was guaranteed. But now that solitude was shattered, and she had to decide what mattered more, being alone or being in control of her own property, the door opened. A man emerged carrying a steaming cup. He was old, older than Delah by a decade at least, nearly blind by the way he moved, careful and slow, one hand trailing along the porch rail. He made his way down the steps and toward the truck without seeming to see her clearly, but he knew she was there. "Brought you coffee," he said. His voice was soft, worn down like river stones. "Figured you could use it." Delah accepted the cup without speaking. It was real coffee, good and strong, not the instant powder she'd been drinking to save money. "Name's Vernon," the old man said. "Vernon Moss. I've been coming here the longest, since Tobias was still alive." "Why?" "Same reason as the others. Nowhere else to go. He settled himself carefully onto the ground, back against the truck tire. You want the whole story, or just the parts that matter? I want you out of my house. Vernon chuckled, a dry sound that turned into a cough. When he recovered, he said, That's fair. But you're still here, which means you're thinking. So I'll give you something to think about. He reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph, its edges soft with handling. He held it up toward her, though his eyes couldn't quite focus on it. This was taken in 1985. That's Tobias there in the middle. That's me on the right, back when I had both eyes working. The other men, they're all gone now. But they were here once. This place saved them. Delah took the photograph. The image showed a group of men standing in front of the homestead. The house looked younger, stronger. The men looked broken. But they were smiling. Tobias was your blood, Vernon said. He didn't have children, didn't marry, but he understood something important. Family isn't always what you're born into. Sometimes it's what you build when everything else has fallen apart. That's a nice sentiment. Doesn't make this legal. Legal and right aren't always the same thing. They are to me, Vernon nodded slowly. Then you do what you think is right. But I'll tell you this, those men in there, every one of them, they've got nowhere else to go. Harlan lost his family when the mine collapsed. Took 3 men with it, and he's been carrying their ghosts ever since. Lyle used to be a professor before the drinking got him. Buck hasn't spoken a word in 4 years, not since Afghanistan. Ray's running from a parole violation that'll put him back inside for something he didn't do. That's not my problem. No, Vernon agreed. It's not. You didn't ask for any of this. You bought yourself a piece of land and some peace. That's all you wanted. He struggled to his feet, using the truck for support. But ask yourself something. Why did Tobias leave this place to drift through the family until it found you? Why didn't he sell it, give it to the state, burn it down? Maybe he knew something you haven't figured out yet. Vernon shuffled back toward the house, leaving Delah alone with the coffee and the photograph and the weight of a decision she hadn't expected to make. She sat there until the coffee went cold. The stars came out, sharp and countless, in the mountain dark. Inside the house she could hear voices, not loud, not celebrating, just the low murmur of men existing together in shared space. Finally, she stood. She retrieved her rifle from the truck bed and walked back to the house. When she opened the door, all conversation stopped. 11 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Here's how this works, Delah said. You can stay, but I'm in charge. My house, my rules. Everyone contributes. No drinking. No fighting. Anyone causes trouble, they're gone. We clear? Harlan stood. We're clear. I want a full accounting. Every man tells me his story. I don't care how ugly it is. If I'm harboring you, I need to know what I'm harboring. Fair enough. And this arrangement lasts until spring. When the road's clear, we revisit everything. Maybe you stay, maybe you go. But nothing's permanent. Nothing ever is, Vernon said from the corner. Delah shouldered her rifle. I'm going to sleep in my truck tonight. Tomorrow, we start figuring out how 12 people survive a winter on supplies meant for 1. After that, you start talking and I start listening. She turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. That cross above the fireplace. What year did Tobias carve his own name? He didn't, Harlan said. He always said he was just keeping the place warm until someone came to claim it properly. Guess that's you now. Delah looked at the cross, at the 11 names carved in memorial or promise or both. Then she walked out into the cold night, leaving the door open behind her so the warmth could spill out into the darkness. Morning came cold and clear. Delah woke in the truck cab with frost on the windows and her back complaining about the angle she'd slept. She was too old to be sleeping in vehicles, even if she'd done it for 30 years. The difference now was she had a house with an actual bed waiting, and she'd chosen the truck on principle. Through the windshield, she could see smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was already up. She grabbed her rifle and walked to the house, boots crunching on frozen grass. Inside, she found Harlan at the stove, cooking eggs and fried potatoes in her cast-iron skillet. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger. She'd skipped dinner, too angry to eat. Coffee's on, Harlan said without turning around. Eggs'll be ready in 5 minutes. Delah poured herself a cup and sat at the table. One by one, the other men emerged from the back rooms and the loft. They moved quietly, respectful of the early hour and the uncertain peace. No one spoke until everyone was seated and Harlan had divided the food onto plates. "We need to talk logistics," Delah said. "I brought supplies for one person to make it through winter. There's 12 of us now. That changes things. We have some stores," Harlan said. "Rice, beans, dried meat. We've been gathering since summer." "Where?" "Root cellar. We restocked it in August." Delah set down her fork. "Show me." Harlan led her outside to the cellar entrance, a wooden door set into the hillside behind the house. He pulled it open, and Delah descended the stone steps into the cool darkness. Harlan followed with a lantern. The space was larger than she'd realized, maybe 10 feet by 12, with shelves lining both walls. And those shelves were full. Jars of preserved vegetables, sacks of grain, cured hams hanging from hooks, wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth. At least 3 months' worth of food, maybe more if they rationed carefully. "We're hunters," Harlan said. "And we know how to live on the land. We won't be a burden." "You already are," Delah said, but there was less heat in it now. She walked along the shelves, taking inventory. Professional, thorough work. "Who did the canning?" "Lyle used to work at his family's farm. He remembers how. And the meat?" "Buck and Silas. They run trap lines all through these mountains." Delah picked up a jar of green beans, examining it in the lamplight. The seal was good. The vegetables looked fresh. These weren't desperate men grabbing at survival. They were competent, skilled in ways that mattered out here. She set the jar back on the shelf. "All right, we'll need to do a full count, figure out exact portions. Nobody goes hungry, but nobody gets fat either. And we need to establish work assignments. This place needs winterizing properly. We can do that. I'm sure you can. Question is, will you take orders from me?" Harlan met her eyes in the dim light. "We're not here to cause trouble. We just need a place to rest." "Everyone needs something," Delah said. "The trick is making sure what you need doesn't destroy what I've built." They climbed back into the daylight. The other men were cleaning up from breakfast, washing dishes in a bucket of heated water. It was domestic in a way that felt strange. 11 rough men performing careful household tasks. Delah called them together in the main room. "I want to see the improvements you've made. Every repair, every change. Then we're going to make a list of what still needs doing before the snow comes heavy." They spent the morning walking the property. Harlan narrated the work like a foreman on a job site. The chimney had been repointed with fresh mortar. The barn roof had been patched with new shingles. The drainage ditches had been cleared and deepened. Fences had been mended. The well had been cleaned and fitted with a new pump handle. "Where'd you get the materials?" Delah asked. "Town, mostly. We pooled our money. Vernon has a disability check that comes monthly. Ray picks up day labor when he can. Silas had some savings before he lost his position." "His position?" Harlan hesitated. "He'll tell you himself when he's ready." They found the map in Harlan's belongings during the afternoon inventory. Delah had insisted on inspecting everyone's gear, making sure there were no weapons beyond what was reasonable, no drugs, no contraband. The men had agreed without argument, which impressed her more than resistance would have. The map was folded carefully inside a waterproof bag, along with a few photographs and a pair of eyeglasses held together with electrical tape. Harlan handed it over without comment. Delah unfolded it on the kitchen table. It showed the entire Bitterroot range, marked with symbols she didn't recognize at first. Then she saw the pattern, X marks scattered across the mountains, each one labeled with initials and dates. "What is this?" "Our sanctuary sites," Harlan said. "Places where men like us can find shelter. Some are just caves or abandoned cabins. Some are more permanent. This place," he pointed to the homestead's location marked with a star. "This is the only one that's lasted more than a season. Tobias made it permanent." Delah traced the marks with her finger. "There were dozens of them, spanning 3 counties. Who maintains the network?" "No one and everyone. Men pass the information along. You help someone, they help the next person. It's not organized. It's just—" Harlan searched for the word. "Necessity. You're telling me there's a whole underground system of homeless men coordinating shelter across the mountains?" Not coordinating, surviving. Delah folded the map and handed it back. Keep it safe. If something happens to you, someone needs to know where these places are. Nothing's gonna happen to me. That's what everyone thinks. Then life proves them wrong. That evening, they gathered by the fire. Delah had decided it was time for the men to make good on their stories. She positioned herself in the chair closest to the door, the seat of authority, whether anyone acknowledged it or not, and waited. Harlan went first. He sat forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His voice was steady but quiet, like he was testifying in church. I was a mine foreman. Silver Creek Mine, over in Idaho. 23 years I worked that mountain. Knew every shaft, every support beam. Knew the sound the rock made when it was happy and when it was angry. He paused. 2019 we had a collapse. Section E, the deepest shaft. I'd told management the supports needed reinforcing. They said it would cost too much, push back the production schedule. I should have walked off. Should have refused to send men down there. But I needed the job. Had a wife, a daughter in college. So I sent them down. His hands tightened into fists. 3 men died. Good men with families. The company blamed me. Said I'd failed to follow safety protocols. They had lawyers, documents, a case built before the dust even settled. We got fired, lost my pension, got blacklisted from every mine in the region. My wife left. Said she couldn't look at me knowing what I'd done. My daughter won't return my calls. That wasn't your fault, Delah said. Company cut corners. Company's responsible. Tried telling that to the widows. Harlan looked up, eyes red but dry. I came here 3 years ago. Vernon told me about it. I planned to stay a week, maybe 2. But winter came, and I couldn't face going back down to the world. So I stayed, been here every winter since. Delah nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. Lyle went next. He was the one who quoted poetry, the one with gentle hands and a voice that sounded like he'd been educated somewhere expensive. I taught English literature at a small college in Oregon. Had a wife, 2 sons. I was good at my job. Maybe too good. I cared more about my students than my family. Started drinking to manage the stress. Social drinking became daily drinking, became problem drinking. Lost my job. Lost my family. Lost my house. He smiled sadly. Turns out you can have a PhD and still end up living under a bridge. The degree doesn't keep you warm. How'd you end up here? Buck found me. I was in bad shape, ready to walk into the wilderness and not come back. He brought me here instead, saved my life, and he's never said a word about it. Buck sat across the fire, silent and still. His eyes reflected the flames, but his face showed nothing. Delah would get his story eventually, but not tonight. Some wounds needed more time. Ray was the youngest, maybe 35, with nervous energy that made him tap his foot constantly. I was framed for assault. Wrong place, wrong time. Looked like the guy who actually did it. Public defender told me to take a plea deal. I refused. Jury convicted me anyway. I served 4 years, got out on parole. He swallowed hard. But the parole officer had it out for me, kept finding violations that weren't there. I knew I was headed back inside, so I ran. Been running for 2 years now. That's a risk, Delah said. If the law finds you here, they find all of us. I know. I can leave if you want. Delah considered it. Then she shook her head. No, but you stay out of sight when anyone comes up the mountain. And if the law does show up, you don't resist. We're not going to war with the authorities over this. Yes, ma'am. The stories continued into the night. Silas had been a sheriff's deputy who'd covered up evidence to protect a childhood friend, then lost everything when the truth came out. Old Vernon had been a coal miner whose lungs gave out, leaving him with a disability check that wasn't enough to rent even the cheapest apartment. The others had their own variations on the same theme. Good men brought low by bad luck, bad choices, or a system that had no room for second chances. By midnight, Delah had heard enough. She stood, stretching her back. Tomorrow we start winterizing in earnest. I want every window sealed, every gap in the walls chinked, every tool sharpened and ready. We're going to need more firewood than you think. And we're going to establish a rotation for cooking, cleaning, and watch duty. Watch duty. Harlan asked. Someone needs to stay awake at all times. Keep the fire going, listen for trouble. We're a long way from help out here. Trouble from what? From whatever comes. Delah walked to the door, then turned back. One more thing. That cross above the fireplace. I want to know everyone's story with it. When you carved your name, what did it mean? It means we belong, Vernon said from the shadows. Maybe not anywhere else, but here. Delah nodded and stepped out into the night. The sky was vast and clear, stars layered so thick they looked like spilled salt. She could hear the men inside, their voices low and tired. Somewhere in the forest an owl called. The mountain answered with silence. She'd come here seeking solitude and found something else entirely. Whether that was better or worse, she couldn't yet say. The work began at first light. Delah divided the men into teams based on their skills and the tasks that needed doing. Harlan and Silas took the barn, reinforcing the structure for the weight of winter snow. Lyle and Ray tackled the windows, fitting them with shutters they built from salvaged wood. Buck maintained his vigil over the fire while also preparing kindling for the months ahead. Vernon, despite his age and failing sight, sorted through the root cellar's inventory with practiced hands, organizing supplies by expiration date and seasonal need. Delah worked alongside them, measuring her authority not by commands given but by work completed. She'd learned long ago that respect wasn't demanded. It was earned through competence and consistency. By the third day, the men had stopped watching her warily and started asking her opinion on decisions. The rhythm of shared labor created something unexpected, camaraderie. Not friendship exactly, but the kind of mutual reliance that came from facing a common challenge. Winter wasn't an enemy they could fight, only one they could prepare for and endure together. On the fourth morning, Delah found Harlan in the barn before dawn, holding an old miner's lamp. The brass was tarnished, the glass cracked, but he'd polished it until it gleamed. He was lighting it carefully, adjusting the wick with the concentration of a man performing a sacred ritual. "That's a nice piece," Delah said from the doorway. Harlan didn't startle. "It was my father's. He worked the mines for 40 years before Black Lung took him. I carried this lamp for 23 years, same as he did. Thought it would keep me safe, like it kept him safe all those decades. But it didn't, no. Turns out luck doesn't inherit." He closed the lamp's glass door and set it on a shelf. "I light it every night. For my father. For the men who died because I didn't stand up to management. For whoever comes after me and has to carry their own failures around. That's a heavy load. Heavy's relative. Some days it's all that keeps me standing, knowing I owe them something, even if it's just remembering." Delah stepped into the barn. The morning light cut through gaps in the walls, laying bars of gold across the hay-strewn floor. "Your daughter, you tried reaching out?" "Letters. Phone calls. Emails before I lost access to a computer. She doesn't respond." His voice stayed level, but the pain underneath was obvious. "Can't blame her. What do you say to your father when he's the reason 3 men didn't come home?" "You say the truth, that it wasn't his fault, that the men who cut corners killed those miners, not him." "She doesn't see it that way. Neither does my ex-wife. Hell, most days I don't see it that way either." Delah picked up a hammer that needed its handle replaced. "I spent 30 years guiding rich people through country they had no business being in. Watch them shoot animals they didn't need, take trophies they didn't earn. I told myself I was just doing a job, that what they did with the opportunities I gave them wasn't my responsibility. But every dead elk, every wounded deer that got away to die slowly in the woods, I was part of that. That's not the same, isn't it? We both made choices for money. We both knew better and did it anyway. Only difference is my choices didn't kill anyone." She set down the hammer. "Point is, carrying guilt's easy. Forgiving yourself's the hard part. And I suspect your daughter's waiting for you to do the second before she can do the first." Harlan looked at her with something like hope, quickly suppressed. "Maybe. Write her again. Tell her where you are. Tell her you're trying to build something good out of what went bad. Sometimes people need to see you're still fighting before they'll fight for you." He nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." Later that morning, Delah drove into town with Harlan for additional supplies. The drive down was easier with company, the silence comfortable rather than empty. At the hardware store, Gil Pemberton watched them unload fence posts with undisguised curiosity. "Heard you got some folks staying up at the old place?" Gil said, casual in the way that meant he'd been waiting to bring it up. "Hired hands?" Delah said, the lie smooth and practiced. "Lots of work to do before winter." "Uh-huh. And these hired hands, they got names?" "Most people do." Gil grunted, returning to his ledger. But as Delah was paying, he leaned forward. "Listen, I don't care what you got going on up there. But folks in town remember what happened to Tobias. He took in too many strays and it brought him trouble. Just be careful, all right? Not everyone's grateful for help." "I'll keep that in mind." On the drive back, Harlan asked, "What did happen to Tobias?" "I don't know. The lawyer's letter just said he died. Didn't give details. Vernon might know. Vernon knows a lot of things he hasn't shared. They arrived to find the others had made significant progress. The windows were shuttered. The barn roof was reinforced. Ray had even managed to fix the pump in the well, and water now flowed freely, a luxury Delah hadn't expected to have through winter. That evening she approached Vernon while he sat by the fire. His eyes stared into the flames without seeing, but his face tracked her movement by sound. "Tell me about Tobias," Delah said, sitting beside him. Vernon was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "He was my brother." Delah sat up straighter. "Your brother?" "Half-brother, technically. Same mother, different fathers. I'm 10 years older. Watched him grow up. He was always the softer one, the kind one. I went into the mines. He went to college, became a teacher. Then his wife died in childbirth, baby too. Something broke in him after that. He quit teaching, bought this land, and started taking in men who needed help. Why? I think he couldn't save his family, so he tried to save everyone else's. Or maybe he just understood that grief makes people do strange things, and helping others was how he handled his own." Vernon shifted, pulling something from his coat. It was a photograph, edges soft with age. He handed it to Delah. This was Tobias, taken the year before he died. The photo showed a man in his 70s, weathered but smiling, standing in front of the homestead. His eyes held the kind of sadness that never fully healed but had learned to coexist with joy. What happened to him? "Developers wanted this land. Family called Dalton. Been around these mountains for generations, buying up properties cheap and selling them high. They made Tobias an offer. He refused. They made another offer, with threats attached. He still refused. Then one winter his cabin burned. Official report said it was an accident, a spark from the fireplace. But Tobias knew how to handle fire. I think the Daltons got tired of waiting." "You're saying they killed him?" "I'm saying he's dead and they got his land. Or they would have, if I hadn't made sure the property stayed in the family. I'm the one who tracked you down, Delah. I'm the one who made sure the lawyer's letter found you." Delah stared at the old man. "You manipulated this whole thing. I gave you an opportunity. What you do with it is your choice. And if I'd sold immediately, if I'd never come up here, then Tobias's dream would have died with him, and I'd have made peace with that. But you didn't sell. You came. You stayed. That tells me something about who you are." Delah stood, anger rising. "You had no right, maybe not. But I'm dying, Delah. Lungs are mostly scar tissue at this point. I'll be lucky to see spring. Before I go, I need to know this place will continue. That men like these," he gestured toward the others, "will have somewhere safe. Can you give me that? I don't owe you anything. No, but you owe yourself the truth about what you want from this life. And I think you want the same thing Tobias did, a place to belong." Delah walked outside, needing air and space. The night was cold enough to hurt, but the pain felt clarifying. She'd been deceived, maneuvered into a situation she hadn't chosen. But Vernon was right about one thing. She hadn't sold. She'd stayed. And somewhere in the work of the past week, this place had started to feel like hers, not because she owned it, but because she was building it. She found the bundle of letters the next day while repairing floorboards in the back bedroom. They were hidden in a gap between the boards and the foundation, tied with twine that had gone brittle with age. Delah brought them to the firelight and carefully unfolded the first one. The handwriting was the same as the will she'd seen. Tobias's hand, shaky but determined. "My dearest Sarah," it began, "another winter has passed, and still I cannot bring myself to send these words to you. You made your choice when you told me I was wasting my life on strangers. But they are not strangers to me. They are the family I built from the wreckage of the one I lost." Delah read through all 16 letters, each one addressed to Sarah, presumably Tobias's daughter, each one expressing regret for the distance between them, hope for reconciliation, and explanation of why he continued his work despite her disapproval. None had ever been sent. That evening, she read one letter aloud to the assembled men. Her voice carried through the quiet house, and no one moved or spoke until she finished. "I hope someday you understand that love takes many forms," she read. "The love I give these men is not the love I owed you, but it is love nonetheless. And perhaps that is all any of us can do, love as best we can, with whatever pieces of ourselves remain intact." She folded the letter carefully. Tobias never sent these because he was afraid of rejection, afraid of admitting he'd failed as a father, even while succeeding as a guardian to strangers. We're all here because we're afraid of something. But maybe the point of this place isn't to hide from our fears. Maybe it's to get strong enough to face them. Harlan met her eyes across the fire. Understanding passed between them, recognition that they were all running from different things, but running nonetheless. "Tomorrow," Delah said, "we start preparing for more than just winter. We start preparing to make this permanent. A real sanctuary, not just a refuge. If we're going to do this, we do it right." Vernon smiled from his chair, his blind eyes turned toward her voice. "Tobias would have liked you. Yeah, well, I would have liked the chance to tell him he should have sent the damn letters. But later, alone in what was now her bedroom, Delah carefully stored the letters in a drawer. They were part of the homestead's history now. Part of her history, too, whether she'd chosen it or not. Outside, Buck's fire burned through the night, and the mountain held them all in its ancient, indifferent embrace. The first snow came in early October. Just flurries that melted by noon, but promised heavier weather ahead. Delah stood on the porch and watched the flakes drift down through the pines, each one a small reminder that time was running out to finish preparations. The men had fallen into a rhythm. Morning started with Buck's fire. He rose before everyone else and had the flames going strong by the time the others emerged. Breakfast was a communal effort, different men rotating through cooking duties. Lyle made decent pancakes. Ray had a talent for omelets. Harlan could make coffee strong enough to strip paint, which everyone agreed was the correct strength. After breakfast, work assignments. Harlan and Delah had taken to planning the day's tasks together over second cups of coffee, their relationship shifting from adversarial to something like partnership. They split the men into efficient teams, matching skills to needs. By the second week of October, they'd completed most of the essential winterizing. What remained were the improvements, the things that would make survival not just possible, but bearable. "We need more firewood," Delah announced one morning. "I figure we've got maybe half what we'll need to make it through to April. There's deadfall all through the north section," Silas said. He was a big man, quiet most of the time, with hands that could split logs like they were kindling. "Buck and I can run cutting operations." "I'll go with you," Delah said. "We'll take the truck, load it heavy, make as many runs as we can before the road becomes impassable." They spent 3 days in the forest. Chainsaws screaming, the smell of pine sap thick in the cold air. Delah worked alongside the men, hefting logs, stacking loads, her muscles remembering this kind of labor from dozens of hunting camps. Silas watched her with approval, the quiet nod of one professional acknowledging another. On the second day, while Buck was deep in the trees marking standing deadwood, Silas told his story. "I was a sheriff's deputy for 18 years. Good at my job, believed in the law. Then my best friend from high school got into trouble. DUI that caused an accident, hurt a kid pretty bad. He came to me crying, said his life was over, begged me to help." Silas loaded another log onto the truck. "I altered the evidence, made it look like the kid ran into the street, that my friend couldn't have avoided it. It worked. Case got dismissed, but someone found out. State police audit caught the discrepancies. They investigated, figured out what I'd done. My friend got charged with evidence tampering on top of everything else. I got fired, lost my pension, and caught a felony conviction. He paused, checking the load. My friend killed himself 2 months later. Couldn't handle the guilt. So I destroyed both our lives trying to save his. Delah wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cold. What happened to the kid? Brain damage, permanent. He'll need care for the rest of his life. Silas's voice was flat, emotionless, in the way that meant the emotions were too big to let out. I send money when I can, anonymous. It doesn't help him, but it helps me live with myself. That's why you carry the badge. Silas pulled the tarnished, bent badge from his pocket. The metal was worn from handling, the county seal barely visible. Reminder of who I was and what I threw away. Some men need to remember where they came from. I need to remember what I did. They worked in silence after that, the chainsaws filling the space where words couldn't reach. That evening, Delah made another supply run into town. She went alone this time, needing space to think. The homestead had become crowded in ways that weren't just physical. 12 people living together meant constant presence, constant awareness of others. She'd spent 30 years cultivating solitude, and its absence was harder than she'd expected. In Pine Haven, she stopped at the post office first. There was a letter waiting, addressed to her in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it standing at the counter. The letterhead said, Dalton, Development Corporation. The message was brief and professional. An offer to purchase the homestead for $54,000, triple what she'd paid. The offer came with a deadline. Respond within 30 days, or the offer would be withdrawn. Something wrong? The postmaster, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, watched her with concern. Just business, Delah said, folding the letter. If it's from the Daltons, it's not just business. Those people don't make offers. They make demands. I'm not interested in selling. Mrs. Chen nodded slowly. Good. That land belonged to Delah Crow, and he never would have sold to them. Had principles, that man. Stubborn principles. What can you tell me about the Daltons? What's there to tell? They've owned half this county for 3 generations. Started with the grandfather, Marcus Sr., back in the 50s. He'd buy properties cheap, find people in trouble, wait until they were desperate, then swoop in with cash offers. Built an empire on other people's misery. That legal. Legal and moral aren't always the same thing, are they? His son, Marcus Jr., was worse. Started using intimidation, having code inspectors harass people, making life difficult until they sold. The grandson, Marcus III, he's smoother, uses lawyers and paperwork. But the goal's the same. Acquire land, develop it, make money. They ever get violent? Mrs. Chen's expression closed down. I don't know anything about that. Which meant yes, but she wouldn't say it out loud. Delah bought stamps she didn't need and left. At the hardware store, Gil was more forthcoming. The Daltons made Tobias's life hell, he said, loading fence staples into a bag. Started with a legal offer like you probably got. When he refused, they sent inspectors, found violations that didn't exist. Tobias fought them in court, won some battles, lost others. Then his house burned. Everyone knew it wasn't an accident, but no one could prove anything. Why didn't the sheriff investigate? Because the sheriff was on the Dalton payroll. Not officially, but Gil made a gesture that suggested money changing hands under tables. Still is, far as I know. You refuse this offer. Things are going to get difficult. I'm used to difficult, not this kind. The Daltons don't lose. They wait, they pressure, they find leverage. And eventually people sell. Or they leave. Or worse. Delah paid for her supplies and drove back up the mountain with the letter burning a hole in her jacket pocket. She needed to tell the men, but she also needed to decide how much danger she was willing to put them in. She arrived to find the homestead transformed. In her absence, the men had built a proper woodshed, framed, roofed, and stacked with the cords they'd cut. Ray and Lyle had constructed a second outhouse, recognizing that one facility for 12 people was insufficient. Someone had even repaired the gate at the property entrance, hanging it straight and true. They were building something, not just surviving but creating. And the Dalton letter threatened all of it. That night, she called everyone together and read the offer aloud. When she finished, silence filled the room. "You should sell," Ray said finally. "Take the money. Get out before things get bad." "That's not your decision," Harlan said. "It's not yours either. This is Delah's property. Her choice." Delah set the letter on the table. "I came here to get away from people who think everything can be bought. I'm not selling, not to the Daltons, not to anyone. But you all need to understand, if I refuse this offer, there will be consequences. For me, and probably for everyone here. So I need to know, are you staying or are you going?" The men looked at each other. Finally, Vernon spoke from his chair by the fire. "We stay. This place, it's all some of us have. We don't run just because someone threatens us, even if it means trouble with the law. With people who have money and power." "Especially then," Silas said. "I spent 18 years enforcing the law. I know what it looks like when law becomes weapon. The Daltons use legality like a club. Someone needs to stand up to them." "I agree," Lyle said. Others nodded. Delah looked around the room at these 11 men who'd become something more than strangers living in her house. They'd become inhabitants, stakeholders, partners in whatever came next. "All right then. We stay, but we do this smart. I want to know everything about the Daltons, their business, their properties, their vulnerabilities. If they're coming for us, we need to be ready." "I can help with that," Silas said. "Still have contacts in law enforcement. People who owe me favors. Do it. Quiet and careful." "We don't want to tip them off," Harlan stood. "I'll start documenting everything we've done here. Improvements, repairs, investments. If they try to claim the place is neglected or abandoned, we'll have proof otherwise." The meeting continued into the night, strategies forming, responsibilities dividing. What had started as a simple refusal to sell was becoming something larger, a decision to fight, to defend not just property, but principle. Later, Delah stood on the porch with Harlan, both of them looking out at the dark mountains. "You know this could get ugly," Harlan said. "I've handled ugly before, not like this. The Daltons play for keeps, so do I." She turned to him. "You ever regret coming here?" "Every day. But I'd regret leaving more." "Yeah," Delah said softly. "Me too." Inside, Buck tended his fire, and the men settled into their evening routines. Tomorrow, they'd continue preparing for winter, but now they were also preparing for war. Whether they called it that or not, the mountain wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the promise of storms ahead. Life at the homestead developed its own rhythms, predictable as tides. Morning fires, communal meals, work assignments, evening stories. Buck's silence became a constant that no one questioned anymore. His presence by the fire was communication enough. Lyle started teaching Ray to read better. The two of them hunched over books in the afternoon light. Old Vernon's health continued its slow decline, his breathing more labored each day, but he refused to complain or slow down. The men were healing in ways none of them could articulate. Not healed, that would take more than a few weeks in the mountains, but healing. The process of moving from broken to functional, from isolated to connected. Delah watched it happen with a mixture of satisfaction and trepidation. She'd built something good here, something worth protecting. But she also knew that good things attracted attention from people who wanted to destroy them. 3 weeks after the Dalton letter, the county sheriff appeared at the property line. Delah met him at the gate, rifle visible but not threatening, propped against the fence post within reach. Sheriff Tom Hendricks was 50-something, with the soft body of a man who'd spent more time behind a desk than in the field. But his eyes were sharp, assessing everything. "Ms. Crow," he said, not getting out of his patrol vehicle. "Just doing a welfare check. Got a report about possible squatters on this property." "No squatters, Sheriff. Just hired hands helping me winterize the place." "Uh-huh. Mind if I take a look around? You got a warrant?" "Don't need one for a welfare check. Actually, you do if I refuse consent. This is private property, legally owned and occupied. Unless you have probable cause to believe a crime is being committed, you're welcome to turn around and head back down the mountain." Hendrick's jaw tightened. "You're being awfully hostile for someone with nothing to hide. I'm being protective of my property rights." "That's not the same thing." They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Hendricks shifted his truck into reverse. "I'll be back." And next time I'll have that warrant. He left, dust rising from his tires on the dirt road. Delah watched until he was out of sight, then walked back to the house where the men had gathered at the windows. That's the beginning, Silas said. The Daltons sent him. He'll find some reason for a warrant, claim code violations or safety concerns. Then he'll come back with force. Can we fight a warrant? Only in court, and that takes time and money. Best thing we can do is make sure everything here is legal and documented. No outstanding warrants, no contraband, no reason for them to arrest anyone. Ray shifted uncomfortably. I've got a warrant. From Montana. The parole violation. Then you need to stay out of sight when the sheriff returns. If he identifies you, we can't protect you. That evening, Delah found Ray sitting alone by the barn, staring out at the darkening valley. She sat beside him without speaking, giving him space to work through whatever he was thinking. I should leave, Ray finally said. I'm putting everyone at risk. You're part of this now. We don't abandon our own. I'm not your own. I'm just some guy who showed up because I had nowhere else to go. That's exactly what makes you our own. Delah pulled her jacket tighter against the cold. I learned something guiding hunters all those years. People think hunting is about being solitary, about the individual hunter and the animal. But the best hunts are the ones where everyone works together. The spotters, the guides, the people who field, dress the animal and pack out the meat. It's a team effort, even when only one person pulls the trigger. What's that got to do with me? This place only works if we function as a team. You leaving doesn't make us safer, it makes us weaker. So you stay hidden when necessary, and you trust that we'll figure this out together. Ray nodded slowly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. Back at the house, Silas had made calls from town using a payphone. He'd gathered what information he could on the Daltons, and now he spread it out on the kitchen table like a battle plan. The Dalton Development Corporation owns 47 properties in this county, he said, pointing to a hand-drawn map. Residential, commercial, and undeveloped land. They've bought most of it in the last 20 years, always through the same pattern. Lowball offer, escalating pressure, eventual acquisition. Any of those acquisitions questionable? Delah asked. All of them, if you look close enough. But they're smart. Everything appears legal on the surface. They use code enforcement, environmental regulations, tax liens, any lever they can find. And they've got the county officials in their pocket, including the sheriff, especially the sheriff. Hendricks has been on their payroll for years. Not directly. They route the money through campaign contributions and charitable donations. But the effect's the same. Harlan leaned forward. So how do we fight them? We find something they did wrong, something we can prove. One crack in the foundation and the whole structure comes down. That's a nice theory. How do we actually do it? Silas pulled out a photograph, old and faded. It showed a surveyor's crew standing in front of a truck, the Dalton Company logo visible on the door. This photo is from 1952. That's Marcus Dalton Sr.'s crew. My contact in the county records office says there were rumors about them for years. Fraudulent surveys, moved boundary markers, forged signatures on deeds. But no one could ever prove it, because the evidence disappeared, Vernon said from the fire. Tobias knew about it. He spent years trying to prove the Daltons stole land from him and others. That's what got him killed. Everyone turned to look at the old man. You never mentioned that, Delah said. You never asked. But yes, Tobias was building a case. He had documentation, photographs, testimony from other victims. He was going to take it to the state attorney general. What happened to the evidence? He hid it. Told me he put it somewhere safe, somewhere it couldn't be destroyed if they came for him. But he died before he told me where. Delah stood abruptly. It's here, has to be. Where else would he hide it? They searched until after midnight. The root cellar, the barn, the walls of the house. Anywhere something could be concealed. They found nothing. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, they gathered back at the fire. Maybe it doesn't exist, Lyle said. Maybe Vernon's remembering wrong. I'm not remembering wrong. Tobias showed me some of it. A ledger, he called it, full of measurements and signatures and dates. Proof that the Daltons had been stealing land for decades. Then where is it? Vernon's blind eyes turned toward the fire. Tobias liked puzzles, said the best hiding place is the one everyone sees but doesn't recognize. It's here. We're just not looking at it right. Delah surveyed the room, seeing it fresh. The hand-hewn logs, the riverstone fireplace, the wooden beams overhead. Everything built by Tobias or those who came after. What would a man who valued sanctuary hide evidence that could destroy his enemies? Her eyes landed on the wooden cross above the fireplace. The 11 names carved into its surface, each one a memorial or promise or both. The cross, she said. Harlan stood. What about it? Tobias never carved his own name. Vernon said he was waiting for someone to come claim the place properly. But what if it wasn't about names? What if the cross itself was the hiding place? They took it down carefully, Buck holding the ladder while Harlan lifted the heavy piece from its mounting. Up close, Delah could see it was hollowed, a box made to look like a solid cross. And set into the base was a seam, barely visible. Harlan worked his knife into the gap. The bottom section slid open, revealing a hollow interior. Inside was a leather-bound ledger wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture and time. Delah lifted it out with trembling hands. The leather was cracked with age, the pages yellow and brittle. But the writing inside was clear. Names, dates, property descriptions, and detailed accounts of boundary changes that didn't match official records. "This is it," Silas said, reading over her shoulder. "This is proof. The Daltons have been fraudulently redrawing boundaries for 70 years. Every property listed here was acquired through false surveys, including this one," Vernon said. "Tobias's original 40 acres should have been 80. The Daltons took half, sold it to someone else, and pocketed the money." Delah flipped through the pages, seeing the pattern repeated dozens of times. Not just small thefts, but systematic organized corruption spanning generations. And at the bottom of each entry, a signature, the surveyor who'd falsified the measurements. "We need to get this to someone who can use it," Harlan said. "State police, attorney general, someone outside the Daltons' influence." "We also need to protect it," Silas said. "The minute they know we have this, they'll come with everything they've got. So we make copies. Multiple copies, distributed to multiple people. That way destroying one doesn't destroy them all." They worked through the night, photographing every page of the ledger with a disposable camera Lyle had bought in town. When they finished, they had 4 complete sets of images. Delah kept one. Silas would take one to his contact in the state police. Ray would mail one to a lawyer Lyle knew in Oregon. The 4th would be hidden again, insurance against the others being compromised. At dawn, they reassembled the cross and hung it back above the fireplace. To any casual observer, nothing had changed. But everything had changed. What now? Ray asked. "Now we wait," Delah said. "Silas gets the evidence to the right people. We continue preparations for winter, and we get ready for the Daltons to make their move, because they will. How long do you think we have?" "Not long. A week, maybe 2. Harlan stood beside her, looking at the cross that had held its secret for so many years. Tobias was a smart man, smart enough to hide the evidence. Not smart enough to use it before they killed him. Maybe he was waiting for the right time. Or the right person. Delah met his eyes. Then we better not waste his weight. Outside, the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow-dusted peaks in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful the way dangerous things often were, promising warmth while preparing to freeze, offering light while hiding shadows. Buck's fire burned steady, and the men gathered for breakfast. Knowing the peace they'd built was temporary, but determined to defend it anyway, Silas left for town at first light, the photographed pages of the ledger hidden in his jacket. The plan was simple: deliver the evidence to his contact in the state police, then return before dark. Simple plans had a way of going wrong, but they had no better options. Delah spent the morning working on the barn with Harlan, replacing rotted boards and reinforcing the structure. The physical labor kept her hands busy while her mind worked through contingencies. They were playing a dangerous game against opponents who had resources and connections they lacked. "What if Silas doesn't come back?" Harlan asked, voicing what she'd been thinking. "Then we know we're dealing with people willing to cross bigger lines than we thought. And if he does come back, but they follow him. Then we deal with that when it happens. She hammered a nail with more force than necessary. I'm done planning for every possible disaster. Sometimes you just have to act and handle the consequences. They worked in silence after that, the rhythm of hammers and saws filling the cold air. By noon they'd made good progress. Delah stepped back to admire their work. The barn was solid now, ready for whatever winter threw at it. That's when she saw the vehicles coming up the mountain road. 3 trucks, moving fast, throwing up dust. Not Silas, he'd taken Ray's beat-up sedan. These were new vehicles, expensive ones, the kind that didn't belong on rough mountain roads. Get everyone inside, Delah told Harlan. Now! She grabbed her rifle from the barn and walked to meet the vehicles at the property line. The men gathered on the porch behind her, a show of numbers, if not force. The trucks stopped in a line, and men emerged, 6 of them, dressed in casual clothes, but moving with the coordination of professionals. Private security, Delah guessed. Hired muscle dressed up as concerned citizens. The last man out was different. Older, maybe 60, wearing an expensive wool coat and polished boots. His face was tanned from time spent in warm places, his hair silver and carefully styled. He walked forward with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "Ms. Crow," he said, extending a hand she didn't take. "Marcus Dalton, I believe you received my letter." "I did." Answers no. I didn't come all this way for a simple no. I came to help you understand the situation you're in. I understand it fine. You want my property. I'm not selling. Situation's pretty clear. Dalton smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. It's not quite that simple. You see, there are complications with your deed. Boundary disputes, survey discrepancies, questions about the legitimacy of the transfer. Very messy legal situation. Funny how these complications only appeared after I refused to sell. The law is complicated. Sometimes issues don't surface until someone looks closely. He glanced at the men on the porch. And I understand you're running some kind of boarding operation here. Unlicensed, uninspected, possibly in violation of county health and safety codes. That could create liability issues for you. They're hired hands. 11 hired hands for a 40-acre property? That seems excessive. Some might call it suspicious. Dalton's smile widened. I'm trying to help you, Ms. Crow. Take my offer, it's generous, more than fair, and walk away clean. Or refuse, and we'll see what the county inspectors find when they come up here. Could be you lose the property anyway, but without the financial compensation. Delah kept her voice level. You're threatening me, I'm explaining reality. The reality is, I want this land. I've wanted it for years. Your cousin was stubborn, and look what happened to him. I'd hate for you to make the same mistake. The implication hung in the cold air between them. Harlan tensed on the porch, and Delah heard the subtle sounds of men positioning themselves for potential conflict. You admitting to killing Tobias Crow? Delah asked. I'm admitting nothing. I'm simply noting that stubbornness has consequences. Dalton pulled an envelope from his coat. Here's a revised offer. $70,000 cash, immediate closing. You have 48 hours to accept. After that, things become difficult. He set the envelope on the fence post and turned back toward his vehicle. His security team backed up with him, hands visible but postures ready for action. Ms. Crow, Dalton said before getting into his truck, I always get what I want. The only question is how much pain everyone experiences before that happens. Choose wisely. They drove away, leaving silence and the envelope in their wake. Delah stood at the fence line until the dust settled, then walked back to the house. The men gathered around as she opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $70,000 already made out to her name, and a quitclaim deed ready for signature. He's serious, Lyle said. He's desperate, Vernon corrected from his chair. Men who negotiate don't show up with checks already written. He knows about the ledger. How could he? We just found it last night. Maybe Silas's contact isn't as trustworthy as we thought. As if summoned by his name, they heard a vehicle approaching. This time it was Ray's sedan, moving fast, engine straining. It skidded to a stop and Silas emerged, looking shaken but intact. We have a problem, he said, stumbling up the porch steps. My contact's been transferred. State police captain I've known for 15 years, suddenly reassigned to a desk job in Helena. His replacement told me to leave the evidence with him. When I asked why, he said it was an ongoing investigation and couldn't discuss it further. Did you give it to him? No, seemed wrong. I left it with a lawyer friend instead, someone outside the police structure. But if they can transfer a captain that fast, they've got reach higher than we thought. Delah filled him in on Dalton's visit. Silas's face darkened as she spoke. He's cleaning up, Silas said, getting all his pieces in position before making a move. The sheriff, the state police, probably judges and county officials too. We're not just fighting one man. We're fighting a network. Then we need a bigger weapon than one old ledger. We need the original evidence, Vernon said. The ledger's proof, but it's 70 years old. We need something current, something that shows the Daltons are still operating the same way. How do we get that? Vernon's blind eyes turned toward the ceiling, his expression thoughtful. There's something I haven't told you. When Tobias died, I didn't just save the ledger. I saved everything. All his research, all his evidence, everything he'd been gathering for years. It's not in the cross. Where is it? There's a cave, about 2 miles north of here. Tobias showed it to me years ago. Said if anything happened to him, I should protect what was there. I've been guarding it ever since, making sure no one found it. Delah stared at the old man. You've been sitting on evidence that could destroy the Daltons for 8 years? I was waiting for someone who could use it without getting killed. Tobias tried and failed. I wasn't going to make the same mistake. But now, he gestured at the assembled men, now there's enough of us to make a stand. Show us, Harlan said. It'll be dark soon. We go at first light. That night, sleep was impossible. The men took turns on watch, weapons at hand, every sound in the darkness potentially hostile. Delah stood on the porch for hours, staring out at the mountains and thinking about the choice she'd made by refusing to sell. She could take Dalton's money and walk away. $70,000 was a fortune to her, enough to buy land somewhere else, start over, live comfortably. But it meant abandoning the men who'd come to depend on this place. Abandoning Tobias's dream, abandoning the principle that some things couldn't be bought. Harlan joined her in the darkness. You having second thoughts? No, you? Every 5 minutes. He leaned against the railing. But I keep coming back to something Vernon said. This place is about men getting a second chance. If we run now, we're telling them that second chances only matter until things get hard. We could all die defending this place. Or we could live knowing we defended something that mattered. Dawn came cold and grey, clouds heavy with the promise of snow. Vernon led them north, moving slowly, but with confidence despite his blindness. He knew these mountains the way Delah knew river routes and game trails, by memory and instinct rather than sight. The cave entrance was hidden behind a rockfall, barely visible even when you knew where to look. Vernon guided Harlan's hands to the right stones, and together they moved enough rock to reveal an opening, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside, the cave opened into a chamber large enough to stand. Vernon pointed to the back wall, where a wooden crate sat covered in canvas. Harlan pulled off the canvas. Inside the crate were file folders, photographs, survey maps, and a second ledger. This one newer, with entries dating from the 1990s through 2016. Delah lifted out the first folder and opened it. Inside were photographs of survey crews moving boundary markers taken from hiding with a telephoto lens. The next folder contained recorded testimonies from people who'd lost their land, each one detailing the Daltons' methods. The third folder held copies of forged deeds, showing how property titles had been manipulated. This is incredible, Silas said, going through the materials. This is enough to launch a criminal investigation. Maybe even a RICO case. Why didn't Tobias use it? Delah asked Vernon. He was going to. He'd arranged a meeting with the State Attorney General for December 2016. 3 days before the meeting, his house burned. The official investigation ruled it accidental, but Tobias was too careful for accidents. The Daltons found out about the meeting and took action. How did they find out? Someone told them. Someone Tobias trusted. He never knew who. Delah looked at the 11 men gathered in the cave, faces illuminated by flashlight, expressions serious but determined. One of them might be a traitor. Or none of them. There was no way to know. We can't keep this here, she said. And we can't trust anyone outside our group. So here's what we do. We document everything ourselves. We photograph every page, every photo, every piece of evidence. Then we distribute copies to multiple people outside Montana, people with no connection to any of us, no reason to be compromised, and the originals. The originals stay hidden, but not here. We'll find a new location, tell no one where. That way, even if someone talks, they can't lead the Daltons to the evidence. They spent the day in the cave, working by lamplight, photographing everything. It was tedious, meticulous work, but essential. By the time they finished, they had complete documentation of 70 years of fraud, intimidation, and theft. As they prepared to leave, Vernon spoke. There's one more thing. The last entry in Tobias's ledger, read it. Delah flipped to the final page. The handwriting was shakier here, written shortly before Tobias's death. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But the fight continues. The Daltons think they can wait everyone out, outlast every challenge. They're wrong. Someone will come. Someone strong enough to finish what I started. To whoever you are, you're not alone. Look to the sanctuary. Look to the men who gather there. They're not just survivors. They're witnesses. And together you can bring justice to this mountain. Delah closed the ledger. He knew. He always knew, Vernon said. Tobias understood that one person couldn't defeat the Daltons. But 12 people working together, protecting each other, that might be enough. They emerged from the cave into failing light, the sky heavy with coming snow. Back at the homestead, they divided the evidence into packets. Ray would take one to Oregon. Lyle would send one to a journalist he'd known in his teaching days. Silas would try again with law enforcement. This time going over everyone's heads directly to the federal authorities, and Delah would keep the original, hidden in a place even she hadn't decided on yet, that night. As snow began to fall, the 12 of them gathered around Buck's fire. They didn't speak of the danger ahead, didn't plan contingencies or strategies. They simply existed together, sharing warmth and silence, and the knowledge that they'd crossed a line from which there was no return. The Daltons would come. Justice would be served or denied. People would suffer, maybe die, but they would face it together. 12 strangers who'd become family through adversity and choice, and that, Delah thought, was worth fighting for. Ray left before dawn, the evidence packet hidden in a hollowed-out book in his duffel bag. They'd chosen him because he was youngest, least likely to draw attention, and because he had the most to lose if he stayed and got caught. He shook hands with each man, lingering longest with Lyle, who'd become something like a father to him over the past weeks. You come back when this is over, Lyle said. You hear me? This is home now. Ray nodded, unable to speak, and drove down the mountain into the pre-dawn darkness. Silas left 2 hours later, heading east toward federal offices in Billings. He'd made contact with an FBI agent who specialized in public corruption cases. The agent had been cautious on the phone, but interested enough to agree to a meeting. Silas carried copies of the most damning evidence: the recent survey frauds, the forged deeds, the pattern of intimidation. 2 days, Silas said to Delah before leaving. If I'm not back in 2 days, assume the worst and act accordingly. What's act accordingly mean? It means you run, take the men somewhere safe, and wait for the law to either help or come after you. He drove away, leaving 9 men and Delah to fortify the homestead and wait. The waiting was harder than the work. They spent the first day reinforcing doors, boarding windows that didn't need boarding, checking and rechecking weapons and supplies. Nervous energy needed outlet, and physical labor provided it. Lyle worked on preparing his evidence packet, a detailed letter to his former journalism professor, now an editor at a regional newspaper, along with copies of the ledger and supporting documents. He wrote and rewrote the letter, trying to find words that would convey the urgency without sounding paranoid. How do you explain that you're hiding in the mountains from a corrupt land developer without sounding insane? He asked Delah, showing her the draft. You tell the truth and trust that truth recognizes itself. That's a nice philosophy. Doesn't always work in practice. Neither does lying. Lyle sealed the envelope and gave it to Vernon, who would take it to town tomorrow and mail it from the post office. Vernon's age and blindness made him the least threatening, most likely to complete the task without interference. That night, Delah found the photograph while organizing Tobias's papers. It had been tucked into the back of the newer ledger, and, at first, she almost missed it, just another old image in a stack of documentation. But something made her look closer. The photograph showed 12 men gathered around a table. She recognized the table. It was the same one they ate at every day. And she recognized the room, the main room of the homestead, though younger, less worn. The photograph was dated 1969 on the back. 11 of the 12 men were visible, faces weathered and serious, but not unhappy. They looked like men who'd found something worth holding on to. But the 12th space at the table was empty. A chair, pulled-out place setting arranged, but no one sitting there. Written across the bottom in Tobias's handwriting, "For the one who returns." Delah stared at the empty chair, then at the current table, where 9 men now sat playing cards and talking in low voices. The parallel was too obvious to miss. Tobias had known or hoped or prophesied, whatever you wanted to call it, that someone would come back to finish what he'd started. She showed the photograph to Vernon. The old man held it close to his failing eyes, fingers tracing the faces he could no longer clearly see. I remember this day. We'd just survived a hard winter, lost 2 men to pneumonia. Tobias gathered everyone who remained and said we needed to document ourselves. Said someday people would need to know that men lived here, struggled here, mattered here. Vernon's finger found the empty chair. He insisted on setting that place, said it was for whoever came next. We thought he was being symbolic. Or he knew, Delah said. He knew someone would inherit this fight. You believe in that kind of knowing? I believe in patterns. I believe in people recognizing what needs to be done and doing it. Call it prophecy or just good observation. Either way, here we are. She pinned the photograph to the wall beside the cross. Let it serve as reminder and inspiration both. They weren't the first to fight this battle, and the ones who came before had faith that someone would continue it. The second day brought no word from Silas or Ray. The silence was expected, but oppressive. Delah kept everyone busy with continued preparations, but they were running out of things to prepare. The homestead was as ready as it would ever be. That afternoon, Vernon made his trip to town to mail Lyle's packet. Harlan drove him down, both, to ensure he completed the task safely and to gather any intelligence about Dalton movements or law enforcement activity. They returned 4 hours later, Harlan's face grim. It's starting, he said, gathering everyone in the main room. Sheriff's got a warrant, code enforcement violations, unpermitted structures, suspicion of illegal habitation. They're coming tomorrow, morning with a full team. Sheriff's deputies, county officials, probably Dalton security people disguised as concerned citizens. Did you mail the packet? Delah asked Vernon. Mailed it and got confirmation it went out on the afternoon truck. Should reach Oregon in 3 days. 3 days might as well be 3 years if we don't survive tomorrow. They spent the evening in final preparations. Delah made everyone understand the rules. No violence unless absolutely necessary for self-defense. Cooperate with legitimate law enforcement, but don't surrender the property or the evidence. It was a fine line to walk, asserting their rights, without escalating into a situation that would justify force against them. What if they tried to arrest us? One of the men asked, a quiet man named Thomas who rarely spoke. Then we go peacefully and trust that the legal system will work. We're not criminals. We're property owners defending our rights. The legal system works for the Daltons. So far, but we've got evidence now and we've distributed it. Even if they arrest us tomorrow, the information's already out there. They can't suppress it all. It was a hope more than a certainty, but hope was what they had to work with. Buck tended his fire with extra care that night, building it high and hot. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the men gathered close, drawn to the warmth and the communal comfort of shared presence. Lyle pulled out a worn book of poetry, Whitman his favorite, and began reading aloud. His voice carried through the room, measured and clear. I am the poet of the body, and I am the poet of the soul. The pleasures of heaven are with me, and the pains of hell are with me. The first I graft and increase upon myself, the latter I translate into a new tongue. That's beautiful, Harlan said. What's it mean? It means we contain everything, the good and the bad, the divine and the damned, and it's our job to take the bad and transform it into something better. That's what we're doing here, taking our failures, our pain, our losses, translating them into something new, a sanctuary, a stand, a refusal to let corruption win. You think poetry matters when men with guns show up? I think poetry is exactly what matters then, because poetry is about meaning, and meaning is what separates humans from animals. The Daltons have power, but we have meaning, and in the long run, meaning wins. In the long run, we're all dead, Thomas muttered. Then we better make sure our deaths mean something. The conversation continued late into the night, men sharing their fears and hopes, their regrets and their determinations. Delah listened more than she spoke, learning these men in ways that months of casual interaction couldn't teach. Fear stripped away pretense, revealed who people really were underneath their daily presentations. They were good men, flawed, certainly, broken, in ways that might never fully heal, but fundamentally decent. They'd made mistakes, paid prices, and sought redemption through simple acts of surviving with dignity. If she had to make a stand with anyone, these were the ones she'd choose. Near midnight, Buck spoke. It was so unexpected, that conversation. Died mid-sentence, everyone turning to stare at the man who'd been silent for 4 years. Home! The word came out rusty, uncertain, as if he'd forgotten how to shape speech, but it was clear enough. This is home. Tears tracked down his weathered face, and he didn't wipe them away. He just sat by his fire, having said what needed saying, and let emotion run its course. Harlan reached over and gripped Buck's shoulder. Yeah, brother, it is. Delah felt something crack open in her chest, some sealed place she'd kept locked for 30 years of solitary living. These men weren't just occupants or hired hands or even friends. They were family, chosen rather than born, and family meant you stood together when trouble came. She stood and walked to the cross above the fireplace, lifting it down carefully. The men watched in silence as she carried it to the table and set it in the center, among the coffee cups and playing cards, and the accumulated debris of their evening. Tobias started a tradition, she said. Every man carved his name when he came here, a promise and a memorial both. We've got 9 men here who haven't carved yet. Time to fix that. She pulled out her knife and carefully carved her own name into the wood, below the others. Delah Crow. When she finished, she passed the cross to Harlan. One by one they carved. Harlan's hand was steady, his letters precise. Lyle's were flowing, artistic. Buck's were simple, carved with shaking hands but deep conviction. The others followed, each man adding his name to the legacy. When they finished, 12 names marked the cross. The original 11 and now Delah. The circle was complete, the prophecy of the empty chair fulfilled. Delah hung the cross back above the fireplace. Tomorrow, whatever happens, we face it as what we are. People who belong here, who have every right to be here, who refuse to be driven away by threats or corruption or fear. Agreed, agreed, they said in unison. The fire burned down to coals. The men dispersed to their sleeping places, some to bedrooms, some to the loft, some to sleeping bags arranged on the floor. Delah took first watch, sitting by the window with her rifle across her knees and her eyes on the dark road. Round 3 in the morning, headlights appeared in the distance, a single vehicle moving slowly up the mountain road. Delah tensed, finger near the trigger, then relaxed as she recognized Ray's sedan. He parked and stumbled out, exhausted but intact. Delah met him at the door. "Evidence is delivered," he said. "My contact in Oregon confirmed receipt and said he's taking it directly to a federal prosecutor he trusts. Should be in official hands by tomorrow afternoon. Good work. Get some sleep." "Silas?" "Not back yet." Ray nodded, worry crossing his face, but he was too tired to do more than collapse onto the couch. Dawn came grey and cold, clouds hanging low over the mountains. No new snow had fallen, but the air tasted like it was coming. The men rose quietly, ate a quick breakfast, and positioned themselves according to the plan they'd developed. Delah would meet whoever came at the property line. Harlan would stand with her. The others would remain in or near the house, visible but not threatening, a show of numbers and determination. They didn't have to wait long. At 8:30, the convoy appeared. 5 vehicles this time. 2 sheriff's cruisers, a county code enforcement truck, and 2 civilian vehicles that Delah recognized from Dalton's previous visit. 15 people total, maybe more. She walked to meet them at the gate, Harlan at her side, rifle slung over her shoulder in a manner that was legal but unmistakable. Sheriff Hendricks emerged from the lead cruiser, warrant in hand, flanked by 3 deputies. Behind him came county officials with clipboards and cameras. And behind them, Marcus Dalton himself, dressed for the occasion in expensive outdoor wear that had never seen actual outdoor use. "Ms. Crow," Hendricks said, his voice carrying official weight, "I have a warrant to inspect this property for code violations and to investigate reports of illegal habitation. You're required by law to grant access." Delah took the warrant and read it carefully. It was legitimate. Signed by a judge, properly filed, listing specific violations to investigate. They'd done their homework. "I'll grant access," she said. "But I'm coming with you, and my associate here is coming too. Every step you take on this property, we're watching. That's your right." The inspection began. County officials photographed everything: the house, the barn, the outbuildings, the men themselves. They measured structures, checked permits that didn't exist, documented modifications that hadn't been approved. It was all theater, Delah knew. They were building a case to condemn the property, to force her out through bureaucratic means rather than direct confrontation. Legal, efficient, and nearly impossible to fight without expensive lawyers and months of court battles. But while they were busy documenting violations, Delah was documenting them. She had Lyle following with a camera, photographing the inspectors, recording their comments, capturing everything on film. 2 could play the documentation game. The inspection lasted 3 hours. By the end, the officials had a list of violations as long as Delah's arm. Unpermitted structures, code violations, safety hazards, illegal occupancy. They posted a notice on the front door. The property was condemned. Occupants had 72 hours to vacate. "You can't do this," Harlan said. "This is her legal property." "The property's fine," Hendricks said. "It's the structures and the occupancy that are illegal. Ms. Crow can return once she brings everything up to code. Could take months, maybe years, depending on how fast permits process. This is bullshit and you know it. This is the law." Marcus Dalton stepped forward, that same cold smile on his face. "Ms. Crow, this is your last chance. I'm prepared to make one final offer. $100,000, cash, immediate closing. You walk away. We forget all of this unpleasantness. The alternative is you fight this in court, lose, and end up with nothing." Delah looked at the condemnation notice, at the officials packing up their equipment, at the sheriff's deputies, standing ready to enforce the order. She looked at her homestead, the place she'd bought for $18,000 and transformed with sweat and hope into something worth defending. Then she looked at Dalton and spoke 2 words. "See you in court." His smile vanished. "You're making a mistake. I've made plenty. One more won't kill me. We'll see about that." The convoy prepared to leave. But before they could, a new vehicle appeared on the road. A dark SUV with federal plates. It pulled up behind the convoy, blocking the exit, and two men in suits emerged. Sheriff Hendricks, one of them said, holding up credentials. FBI, we need to speak with Ms. Crow and have some questions about Marcus Dalton. No one leaves until we're done. The agent's eyes found Delah's, and the slightest nod passed between them. Silas had succeeded. The FBI agent's presence transformed everything in an instant. Sheriff Hendricks's face drained of color. The county officials suddenly became very interested in their clipboards. And Marcus Dalton went perfectly still, the way animals do when they sense a predator. The lead agent was a woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of authoritative bearing that came from years of commanding rooms. Her badge identified her as Special Agent Catherine Ross. Her partner was younger, a man with the build of someone who spent serious time in a gym. Badge reading Agent Mitchell Torres. Ms. Crow, Ross said, approaching with measured steps. I'm Special Agent Ross, with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. We received some very interesting documentation yesterday from multiple sources. I'd like to discuss it with you if you have a moment. I have all the time you need, Delah said. And Mr. Dalton, Ross turned to face the developer, we have questions for you as well. You're not under arrest, but I strongly suggest you cooperate fully. Dalton's lawyer face slipped into place, the calm and ruffled expression of someone who'd dealt with law enforcement before and knew how to handle it. Of course, Agent Ross, I'm always happy to cooperate with federal authorities. Though I'm not sure what this is regarding. I think you know exactly what this is regarding. The next hour unfolded with the careful choreography of a legal dance. Ross separated everyone. Dalton and his people to one area, Delah and her men to another, the sheriff and county officials to a third. Torres worked through each group methodically, taking statements, asking questions, documenting everything. Ross stayed with Delah, and they walked the property while talking. Harlan accompanied them along with Vernon, who Ross seemed particularly interested in. Your friend Silas brought us compelling evidence, Ross said. Survey fraud going back decades, forged deeds, intimidation tactics, and what appears to be a coordinated effort to steal land through manipulation of county systems. But evidence like that needs corroboration. It needs witnesses willing to testify. We'll testify, Delah said. All of us. Some of your people have complicated legal situations. Ray Coleman has an outstanding warrant in Montana. That makes him a less credible witness. Ray was framed. If you look at his case, we have looked at his case. Agent Torres pulled the file yesterday. You're right, it stinks of coerced testimony and prosecutorial misconduct. We're working with Montana authorities to review it. But in the meantime, his legal status complicates things. Vernon spoke up, his voice reedy but clear. I can testify. I've been watching the Daltons operate for 40 years. I know where the bodies are buried, both literal and figurative. Ross stopped walking. Literal bodies? Figure of speech, mostly, but I know about the intimidation, the threats, the fires that weren't accidents. I know because I helped my brother Tobias document it all. And I know because some of those tactics were used against me too, back when I still owned land they wanted. You lost property to the Daltons? 20 acres Prime Valley land. They claimed an old survey error meant the boundaries were wrong, that I'd been using county land without permission. They had paperwork, signatures, official seals. Everything looked legitimate. I fought it in court and lost because they had more lawyers than I had dollars. Later I found out the survey was fraudulent, but by then it was too late. Ross pulled out a notebook. I need details. Dates, names, documentation if you have it. I have it. Kept everything, just like Tobias taught me. It's all in the cave, along with the evidence Silas brought you. There's more evidence? Much more. Original documents, photographs, recorded testimonies. Tobias spent 20 years building a case. We've continued his work. They walked back to the house, where Torres was still working through statements. Marcus Dalton sat in one of the vehicles, isolated and silent, while his lawyer stood outside, having an intense conversation on a cell phone. How long before you can arrest him? Harlan asked Ross. That's not how this works. We need to build an airtight case. White-collar prosecutions are complex. We need to prove intent, demonstrate pattern of behavior, connect actions to specific laws broken. The evidence you've provided is a start, but it's still just a start. So he walks away today? For now. But trust me, Mr. Price, he's not walking away clean. We've already frozen his business accounts pending investigation. We've interviewed witnesses. We've subpoenaed county records. The machinery of justice is slow, but it's moving. Sheriff Hendricks appeared, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Agent Ross, I need to speak with you. In a moment, Sheriff. Now, please. It's about the condemnation order. Ross excused herself and walked over to Hendricks. Delah couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see the sheriff's body language, defensive, apologetic, desperate. When Ross returned, her expression had shifted. Sheriff Hendricks has agreed to withdraw the condemnation order pending review of the inspection's legitimacy. He's also agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation into potential abuse of office. What does that mean? Delah asked. It means he's trying to save himself by giving us information about the Daltons. Whether that saves him or not remains to be seen. But in the meantime, you keep your property. Relief flooded through Delah so intensely she had to steady herself against the porch railing. Harlan gripped her shoulder, his own expression showing the same overwhelming emotion. What about Dalton? Vernon asked. He's still a threat. We're issuing a restraining order. He's not to contact you, come near this property, or make any further moves to acquire it. Violation of that order will result in immediate arrest and additional charges. He'll find a way around it. Men like him always do. Maybe, but for now you're protected. And every day we investigate is another day we get closer to a prosecution that puts him away permanently. Ross handed Delah a business card. If anything happens, any contact from Dalton, any threats, anything suspicious, you call me immediately. We're monitoring his communications and movements, but he's clever. Stay vigilant. We will. The FBI agents spent another hour collecting evidence and taking photographs. They confiscated some of the county's documentation, citing it as potential evidence of fraud. They interviewed each of Delah's men individually, recording their statements and documenting their stories. When they finally prepared to leave, Ross pulled Delah aside one last time. What you're doing here, she said, gesturing at the homestead and the men. It's good work. These men need a place like this. But you need to understand, going up against someone like Dalton, it comes with risks. He's facing serious charges, possibly decades in prison. Desperate men do desperate things. I understand. Do you? Because the legal protection we can offer has limits. We can't station agents here. We can't provide round-the-clock security. You're remote, isolated, and vulnerable. If Dalton decides to act outside the law, we might not know until it's too late. Then we'll handle it ourselves. Ross studied her face. I believe you would. Just be smart about it. Don't give him ammunition to use against you. The convoy left, FBI vehicles first, followed by the county officials, and finally Sheriff Hendricks, who looked like a man driving toward his own execution. Marcus Dalton's vehicles went last, and as they passed the property line, Dalton stared at Delah through the window with eyes that promised retribution. When the dust settled and silence returned, the men gathered on the porch. No one spoke for a long moment, each processing what had just happened. Then Lyle started laughing. It began as a chuckle and built into full, gasping hilarity. The tension of the past days found release, and soon others joined in, not because anything was particularly funny, but because laughter was better than crying or screaming or acknowledging how close they'd come to losing everything. We did it, Ray said, when the laughter finally subsided. We actually did it. We survived the first round, Delah corrected. The fight's not over. Maybe not. But we won today. That's worth celebrating. They celebrated with a feast. Venison Buck and Silas had been saving for a special occasion. Vegetables from the root cellar, bread Lyle baked fresh, and whiskey that Vernon produced from a hiding place no one knew he had. For medicinal purposes, Vernon said with a sly smile, pouring generous portions. They ate and drank and told stories until the sun set, and Buck's fire was the only light except for the stars. It was the kind of evening Delah had imagined when she first bought the homestead. Peaceful, communal, whole. The fact that it had taken 11 homeless men and a war with a corrupt developer to achieve it seemed like the universe's strange sense of humor. Silas returned near midnight, escorted by an FBI agent who wanted to verify the homestead's location for their records. He looked exhausted but triumphant, and when he walked through the door, the men greeted him like a returning hero. "Tell us everything," Harlan said. Pouring coffee, Silas settled into a chair with a grateful sigh. "After I left here, I drove straight to Billings, met with Agent Ross. She's the real deal, by the way, someone who actually cares about corruption cases. I showed her everything, the ledger, Tobias's documentation, the pattern of fraud. She brought in her partner and a federal prosecutor. They spent 4 hours going through it all. What convinced them?" Delah asked. "The scope. This wasn't just 1 or 2 questionable land deals. This was systematic fraud spanning 70 years, involving multiple county officials, affecting dozens of properties. The prosecutor said it was potentially the largest public corruption case in Montana history. Potentially. Everything depends on witnesses and documentation holding up in court. The Daltons will hire the best defense lawyers money can buy. They'll attack every piece of evidence, every witness's credibility. It's going to be a long fight, but we have a chance. We have more than a chance. We have a case. That's more than Tobias ever had." Vernon raised his whiskey glass. "To Tobias. May he rest knowing his work mattered." They drank to that, and to other toasts, to justice, to sanctuary, to stubborn people who refused to quit when quitting was the sensible thing to do. Around 2 in the morning, most of the men had drifted off to sleep. Delah found herself alone on the porch with Harlan, both of them too wound up to rest. "What happens now?" Harlan asked. "We wait. We keep this place running. We hope the legal system works the way it's supposed to. And if it doesn't, then we deal with that when it comes." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Delah thought about the path that had led her here. 30 years of solitude, of keeping people at arm's length, of telling herself that independence was the same as strength. She'd been wrong. This, what she'd built with these men over the past weeks, this was strength. Not the kind that came from standing alone, but the kind that came from standing together. "I'm going to write to my daughter," Harlan said suddenly. "Tonight, before I lose my nerve. Tell her everything about the mine, about coming here, about what we just did. Maybe she'll respond, maybe she won't, but I need to try." "That's good. That's important. You ever have family, Delah? People you left behind?" "No one that mattered. My parents died when I was young. I had an uncle who raised me, taught me to hunt and track. He died when I was 23. After that, it was just me and the wilderness. That's lonely. I thought it was freedom. Turns out I was confusing the two. You're not alone anymore." "No," Delah agreed. "I'm not." Dawn came too quickly, bringing with it the realization that life had to continue despite the drama of the previous day. There was still firewood to cut, meals to cook, winter to prepare for. The men rose and fell into their routines with the resilience of people who'd survived worse than legal battles. But around noon, a vehicle appeared on the road. Not a convoy this time, just a single truck. Delah grabbed her rifle and went to meet it, but relaxed when she recognized the hardware store owner, Gil Pemberton. Gil climbed out with a box in his arms. "Brought you some things. Figured you might need them." The box contained supplies, nails, wire, lamp oil, batteries. Small things, but expensive ones. "Gil, I can't pay for all this right now." "You're not paying. I'm donating. Heard what happened yesterday. The FBI showing up. The Daltons getting investigated. Word travels fast in small towns." He looked at the homestead, at the men working in the yard. "Tobias was a good man. Helped a lot of people, including me when I was going through hard times. If you're continuing his work, least I can do is help." "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep fighting. Someone needs to stand up to the Daltons, and it might as well be you." Other townspeople followed throughout the day. Mrs. Chen from the post office brought fresh bread. A farmer Delah had never met dropped off 2 deer he'd butchered, saying he had more meat than his family needed. A woman who ran the diner sent up 3 pies with a note, "For the sanctuary. Keep it going." By evening, the homestead had more supplies than they'd had before the confrontation. But more than that, they had something unexpected: community support. The town had been watching, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Now that the FBI had taken their side, people felt safe expressing support they'd been hiding for years. "This is what Tobias wanted," Vernon said, surveying the donated supplies. "Not just a sanctuary for lost men, but a gathering place for the community. A reminder that people can fight back against corruption and win. We haven't won yet. No, but we're winning. That's different." Agent Ross called that evening with an update. They'd arrested 3 county officials on charges of fraud and accepting bribes. Marcus Dalton hadn't been arrested yet, but he was under investigation for multiple felonies. Their case was solid and getting stronger every day. "There is one concern," Ross said. Dalton posted a significant bond for his business to continue operating during the investigation. "He has resources, and he's not accepting defeat gracefully. Be careful, Miss Crow. Desperate men are dangerous men. I understand. I hope you do. We're doing everything we can from our end, but you're remote and vulnerable. Don't take unnecessary risks." After the call, Delah gathered the men and shared the information. They agreed to maintain heightened security. Watches throughout the night, weapons readily accessible, vehicles positioned for quick escape if necessary. "Are we expecting him to attack?" Ray asked. "We're expecting him to do something," Delah said. "What that something is, we don't know. But we won't be caught unprepared." That night, Delah took the late watch, sitting by the window with her rifle and her thoughts. The mountain was quiet, the kind of deep silence that came from snow-dampening sound even before it fell. She thought about the photograph of the 12 men around the table, the empty chair waiting for someone to fill it. She'd filled it, though not in the way Tobias might have imagined. She wasn't a man seeking sanctuary. She was a woman who'd bought land and found purpose. But maybe that was close enough. Maybe the chair wasn't about gender or circumstance, but about willingness to stand and fight when standing and fighting was required. Around 3 in the morning, Buck emerged from his sleeping area and joined her by the fire. He didn't speak. That was still rare for him, words coming slowly and painfully. But he sat beside her in companionable silence, 2 people keeping watch over something worth protecting. "Home," he said finally, the word coming easier this time. "Yes," Delah agreed. "Home." The fire crackled, and the night held its breath, and 12 people who'd found each other through accident and need slept safe under a roof they'd defended together. The fight wasn't over. The Daltons still had power and resources and connections. The legal battle would take months, maybe years. There would be setbacks and challenges and moments when quitting seemed like the only reasonable option, but they'd crossed the threshold from victims to fighters, from isolated individuals to a unified force. And that transformation, once made, couldn't be unmade. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and steady, covering the mountain in a blanket of white that would last until spring. Winter had arrived, and they were ready for it. Together, 2 weeks after the FBI's visit, Vernon died. He went peacefully in his sleep, which was more than most men got, and exactly what he'd said he wanted. They found him in his chair by the fire, Buck's flame still burning strong, his face peaceful in a way it hadn't been in life. They buried him on the property, on a hill overlooking the valley where the morning sun hit first. It took a day to dig through the frozen ground, all the men taking turns with picks and shovels. The work was hard, and the weather was bitter, but no one complained. This was what family did. They honored their dead with sweat and time, and the certainty that loss mattered. Half the town showed up for the funeral. Gil Pemberton read from scripture. Though Vernon had never been particularly religious, Mrs. Chen brought flowers that she'd driven 60 miles to find in the winter. The farmer who donated the deer stood silent in the back, hat in hand, paying respects to a man he'd barely known, but understood nonetheless. Delah spoke the eulogy. She talked about Vernon's stubbornness, his loyalty, his refusal to let his brother's dream die, even when doing so would have been easier. She talked about how he'd orchestrated her arrival, manipulated events so that someone would return to fight the battle Tobias had started. "He died knowing we won," she said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Not the whole war that's still being fought in courts and offices far from here, but the battle for this place, for the right to exist and resist and refuse to be moved by people who think everything can be bought. That battle we won, and Vernon knew it. They lowered him into the ground beside where they'd reinterred Tobias. Brothers in death as they'd been in life, guardians of a place that had outlasted them both. After the funeral, after the townspeople had left, and the men had returned to the warmth of the house, Delah stood alone at the gravesite. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. "I'll keep it going," she said to the frozen earth. "Your sanctuary." His dream, all of it. "I promise," the wind answered, cold and sharp, carrying her words down into the valley and away. Life continued. The legal case against the Daltons progressed with bureaucratic slowness. Hearings, depositions, motions filed and contested. Agent Ross kept Delah updated on major developments. 3 more county officials had been indicted. The former sheriff had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Marcus Dalton was fighting on every front, but the evidence was overwhelming. "It'll be at least a year before trial," Ross said during one call. "Maybe longer. But we're building something that can't be torn down. Your evidence, your testimony, it's the foundation of everything. Whatever you need," Delah said. "We're not going anywhere." The homestead transformed through the winter. What had started as a temporary shelter for 11 homeless men became something more permanent, more intentional. They built proper bunkhouses in the barn, with insulation and wood stoves and enough space for privacy. They expanded the root cellar and the food storage. They built a workshop where Silas could do carpentry and Lyle could teach Ray more than just reading. Word spread through the network of homeless men and displaced veterans. Others showed up, carefully vetted, gradually integrated into the community. By spring, there were 18 people living on the property, and Delah had established formal rules and structures. Everyone contributed labor. Everyone shared meals. No drinking, no drugs, no violence. If you couldn't follow the rules, you left. Simple as that. Some men stayed a few weeks and moved on, finding jobs or reconnecting with family. Others stayed indefinitely, making the sanctuary their permanent home. Holland became Delah's second-in-command, managing the day-to-day operations while she handled the legal and financial aspects. His daughter wrote back in February. The letter was tentative, cautious, but it was contact. She said she'd seen the news about the FBI investigation, about her father's role in exposing corruption. She said maybe they could talk sometime when he was ready. Holland cried when he read it, big gasping sobs that years of suppressed emotion. Delah left him alone to feel it, knowing some moments were too private for witnesses. Ray's case was reviewed by federal prosecutors who found the coercion and misconduct that had led to his conviction. His record was expunged, his parole terminated. He was free for the first time in 7 years. He chose to stay at the sanctuary anyway, saying he'd found something he'd been looking for without knowing he was searching. Buck spoke more often now, though he'd never be chatty. But he managed full sentences, conversations, even occasional laughter. Whatever he'd locked away inside himself was slowly, painfully emerging into light. Lyle got a job teaching at the local high school, filling in for a teacher on medical leave. The job was supposed to be temporary, but the students responded to him, and the principal asked him to stay permanently. He kept his room at the sanctuary, commuting down the mountain 3 days a week, but always returning. Silas worked with the FBI as a consultant on the corruption case. His knowledge of law enforcement procedures and county systems made him invaluable. The FBI offered him a full-time position when everything was resolved. He was considering it. Spring came late to the mountains, snow persisting into April, before finally surrendering to sun and warmth. The meadow grass turned green. The aspen budded and leafed. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and the sound of water filled the valley. Delah walked the property boundaries one morning in May, surveying everything they'd built. The house stood solid, freshly painted, smoke rising from Buck's ever-present fire. The barn was weatherproof and functional. The garden plots were tilled and ready for planting. Fences marked clean lines, and the gate at the entrance bore a new sign. Hand-carved by Silas, Crow's Sanctuary, in memory of Tobias and Vernon. A home for those who need one. She thought about the woman who'd arrived here 7 months ago, seeking solitude and silence. That woman had wanted to escape people, to hide from the complications of human connection. She'd been running from something she couldn't name, and she'd thought distance was the answer, but distance wasn't the answer. Neither was silence. The answer was this: community built from broken pieces, sanctuary created by people who understood what it meant to need sanctuary. The answer was choosing to stay when leaving was easier, fighting when surrender was safer, standing with others instead of standing alone. The legal case would continue for months or years. The Daltons would fight with every resource they possessed. There would be setbacks and frustrations and moments when justice seemed impossibly distant, but that was tomorrow's problem. Today, she had a homestead to run, men to lead, and a promise to keep to 2 dead brothers who'd believed that one person could make a difference if they were stubborn enough. She walked back to the house, where breakfast was being prepared and the morning's work assignments were being discussed. Harlan met her at the door with coffee. "Ray wants to build a chicken coop," he said. "Thinks we should have fresh eggs." "Tell him yes, as long as he's the one feeding them." Already did. They stood on the porch together, watching the valley wake up. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning mist. Somewhere in the forest, birds sang territorial declarations. The mountain breathed around them, ancient and patient. "You ever regret it?" Harlan asked. "Buying this place? Everything that came after?" Delah considered the question seriously. She thought about the money she could have taken from Dalton, the quiet retirement she could have had somewhere easier and safer. She thought about the 30 years of solitude she'd cultivated, the independence she'd prized above all else. Then she looked at the sanctuary she'd built, the men she'd sheltered, the community that had formed around her refusal to be moved. "No," she said, "I don't regret it. Not any of it." "Good. Neither do I." Inside, the men were gathering around the table, not 12 anymore, but 18. The table had been expanded, more chairs added, but the original cross still hung above the fireplace with its 12 names carved in memorial and promise. Delah took her seat, not at the head of the table. She'd never been comfortable with that kind of obvious authority. But in the seat Tobias had left empty in the photograph from 1969. The chair for whoever returned, she'd returned, not to her own past, but to a legacy someone else had started and entrusted to the future. And she'd found that the empty space wasn't a burden. It was an invitation to build, to fight, to stand, to matter. The mornings stretched ahead of them, full of work and possibility. There would be firewood to cut and meals to cook and repairs to make. There would be new arrivals to integrate and old residents to bid farewell. There would be legal battles to fight and winter to prepare for, and 1,000 small challenges that came with living together in an isolated place. But they would face it all as what they were: a family built from necessity, held together by choice, and made strong by the simple refusal to quit when quitting was the easy path. Outside, Buck tended his fire, and the smoke rose straight into the clear spring sky, a signal visible for miles that said, "We are here. We remain. We will not be moved." And in the valley below, the town of Pine Haven woke to another day, secure in the knowledge that sometimes, when ordinary people stood together against corruption and greed, ordinary people won. The mountain held them all, the living and the dead, the broken and the healing, in its ancient embrace. And on the hill overlooking the valley, 2 graves bore simple markers: Tobias Crow, builder of Sanctuary Vernon Moss, keeper of faith. The wind whispered through the pines, and the sanctuary endured. And the story that had begun with one man's dream continued in the hands of those who'd chosen to carry it forward. "Home," Buck had said. And he was right, this was home.